Welcome into the college football recap. Forgive our technical issues. We've had a bunch of them this morning. We're going to fight through it and make sure this happens. I'm Jeff Cameron. Great to be with you as always. We'll have an opportunity to look around college football's top 25. We'll recap that. I will have in just a few moments Bama insider Joseph Hastings on. By the way, I want you to know right from the get-go here, we did effort to have our friends on from VolQuest. Obviously, a huge win over Alabama. Brent Hubbs and those guys do such a good job with VolQuest. Austin, Eric, all of them are great. But also, that is a smaller staff, and they are working their butts off this morning. We could not get them on, but we're not going to ignore that game. We are going to have Bama insider Joseph Hastings on to talk about that game. He will join us momentarily. Later in the show, KSR's Adam Luckett going to join us. A big win for Kentucky as well, and that sets up a showdown with Tennessee. Should be an awful lot of fun. And then, of course, we have an opportunity to talk about Michigan and Penn State as well. Nate Bauer, Blue White Illustrated, joined us earlier this morning when we were dealing with those difficulties, so we will have his interview as well. So we'll look at those three with those on three sites and those guests just a moment. Now to the games themselves. Let's take a good look around what was billed as Separation Saturday. And if you're into college football and you're a huge college football fan the way I am, you might have wanted to park your butt on the couch all morning long into the afternoon, late into the night. Maybe you were watching that incredible Utah-USC game. It was a beautiful day of college football. We start with that game, Michigan and Penn State. We're looking at those noon kickoffs right off the bat. You got a chance. Maybe you got you a mimosa, sat back, cup of coffee, your choice, of course, and watch some football. That game didn't pan out the way that we had hoped, and at least in terms of competitiveness, Michigan set the tone early, dominated on the line of scrimmage. The Wolverines now 7-0, 4-0 in the Big Ten, finished with 418 yards rushing against a team that was giving up fewer than 80 yards rushing a game. That's domination. I digress, though. We should probably start with the number one team, or certainly formerly number one, will be again Georgia, who got a ho-hum win over Vandy, 55-0. The good news for the Dogs, Stetson Bennett got it going again, threw for 289 yards and 2 touchdowns. And what may be considered the game of the night, again, we'll circle back to Tennessee and Alabama for the 3:30 game, but what might be considered the game of the night, Utah knocking off USC 43-42. Cam Rising throws for 415 yards, ran for 3 touchdowns, and scampered up the middle for the go-ahead 2-point conversion with 48 seconds left in that game in Salt Lake City. They win it 43-42. Not to be outdone, TCU 43, Oklahoma State 40. That game, 2 overtimes. Kendre Miller scoring on a 2-yard run in the second overtime as the Horned Frogs won a matchup of the Big 12's last remaining undefeated teams. Ole Miss ran for 448 yards. The Rebels had 3 100-yard-plus rushers in a game for the first time since 1976. Are 7-0 for just the second time since 1962. They drop Auburn 48-34. Oklahoma got back on track. Certainly offensively, they did 52-42 over Kansas. Dylan Gabriel goes for over 403 yards. Kentucky 27, Mississippi State 17. As I mentioned a moment ago, At the outset of the show, we'll have an opportunity to talk to Adam Luckett about that game. Fun game indeed, as Kentucky now sets up for that matchup against Tennessee. That will be a high-profile game. They win. Will Levis comes back in that game. Chris Rodriguez Jr. is the story, though. 196 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, 2 second-half scores there. Texas beats Iowa State in a defensive-minded game, 24-21. Quinn Ewers back for Texas, threw for 3 touchdowns, including the go-ahead score with less than 5 minutes remaining in Austin. And finally, would you look at Illinois, everybody? They keep on winning. They knock off Minnesota 26-14. Chase Brown rushing for 180 yards. Career high 41 carries, caught a 40-yard touchdown pass. As Illinois is now 6-1, 3-1 in the Big Ten, winning its 5th straight game. So later, Nate Bauer joins us late in the show. We'll also, again, have a chance to recap the other matchups, but we've got to go to the Alabama-Tennessee game. And, hey, I was as excited for this game as anybody else was. I couldn't wait for this game. Joseph Hastings joins us now for Bama Insider. Doesn't go Bama's way. We're not used to having this conversation, Joseph, where Alabama is on the wrong side of the ledger here. First of all, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on. And you're absolutely right. You know, you just kind of expected Alabama to come out on top. And even though Tennessee's high-powered offense was giving them fits, throughout the day, you just kind of expected Bryce Young to lead them down, which he was able to do. Wasn't able to connect on a field goal. Tennessee goes 45 yards down the field in 2 plays. It's just, it was, in my opinion, the game of the year so far, and I don't think many people would disagree with that.
Yeah, it was an awesome game. And I know Nick Saban's got to be very frustrated because this is another game with a lot of penalties for Alabama. And I think sometimes you'll hear fans, they make a big deal out of penalties. We've seen great teams overcome penalties all the time, but this has been a trend for Alabama. It was a record 17 penalties, 130 yards. Talk a little bit about that, what Nick Saban had to say about this game. I think it's fairly obvious. Explosive plays for Tennessee, one after the other. They were able to do it via the air, and then also all of those penalties. Talk a little bit about the big picture there as they leave that stadium with a chance to win that game, but a couple of instances in which Alabama shot themselves in the foot.
I mean, the big picture is that Alabama is an undisciplined football team. You know, we have multiple games now where penalties have cost them and put them in put them in a position to lose the game. You know, they had those issues against Texas. And when you think about penalties, you think of something that could be resolved. You know, something that it's correctable mistakes that Alabama is making. No, these aren't correctable mistakes. They're continuing to repeat them. Like you mentioned, 17 penalties for 130 yards. Just untimely penalties too, like a Trayshawn Holden false start that you had there too, that put them in tough position, holding calls, and offensive penalties, defensive penalties, just all around. It wasn't a good performance by Alabama in that respect. And even with all of that being said, 17 penalties for 130 yards, the refs seemingly, favoring Tennessee in certain situations, namely the targeting call that wasn't made on Bryce Young, and, Hendon Hooker throwing for 5 touchdowns, Jalen Hyatt catching 5 touchdowns. With all that being said, Alabama was in a position to win this game. So, as an Alabama fan, you can kind of take this in 2 different ways. One, we have issues that will not be able to be resolved. It's going to plague us down the line. We may lose one game before the SEC championship. We may be even lucky to make the SEC championship. You can have that perspective, or you can have the perspective that with all of that happening, Bryce Young coming back from an injury, throwing for 455 yards, leading the way there, that the offense, as it looked yesterday, is potentially explosive enough to overcome those issues. So, but the penalties are an issue, and it's been an issue for Alabama this season.
Joseph, I wonder, we're accustomed to Alabama having one of, if not the best defenses in the country, but we're seeing a little bit of a disturbing trend here. I could make the argument that against Texas, if Ewers hadn't gotten hurt, he would have amassed huge numbers in that football game. Now you see Hendon Hooker, who now vaults himself in that Heisman race. He's having a fantastic year. You got to give the guy credit. He was fantastic here. You referenced the numbers, completed over 70% of his passes, 385 yards, 5 touchdowns, was able to scramble some. We're not used to seeing Alabama's defense look this susceptible. Has Nick Saban addressed that, talked about that? I think we came into the season believing Alabama's defense would be the best in the country, or one of the top 2 or 3 defenses in the country. It doesn't appear to be right now.
Yeah, I mean, refer to the defense as soft, and honestly, you can't really disagree with that assessment because of how the secondary looked specifically. And, Jalen Hyatt was able to essentially do whatever he wanted to do, and you can't necessarily blame the DBs too much there. They're put in a lot of one-on-one situations. At some point, you have to kind of adjust and give some safety help over the top, or at least make it difficult for number 11 to catch the ball. He was able to do whatever he wanted to do, yesterday, and it kind of reminds me of what Devontae Smith was able to do against Ohio State in the championship game. Just no adjustments being made there in that respect. So it is an issue of the players not being able to execute, but it's also an issue of the coaching staff not being able to adjust in that respect as well. And then also the defensive line wasn't able to generate any pressure. No quarterback hurries yesterday. That is honestly, in my opinion, the stat of the game. No quarterback hurries. Hendon Hooker was able to sit back in the pocket, essentially do whatever he wanted to do. There was one sack by DJ Dale, but that's a deadly combination, not in favor of Alabama in that respect. No quarterback hurries or pressures or anything like that, and then the secondary not being able to live up to expectations there. So yes, when you project further out here, and you look at Alabama's chances of overcoming this loss and potentially trying to win a national championship, you have to look at those two areas and say, if they're not able to do that, it's going to be hard to win many games. But they may match up well with a team like Georgia, where they wouldn't be able to take advantage of them on deep throws and stuff like that. But against an Ohio State, a Tennessee, it's going to be hard to overcome that.
It's always interesting with Alabama. The bar is so high. We talk about the difference between winning a national championship or not. It's a national championship or nothing for Alabama every year. That is the goal. So when you look at games like this, I think most of us from a distance say, well, Alabama will rebound, and they likely will, and they get a chance now next against Mississippi State, a less powerful offense certainly. And as long as they're in that SEC championship game, Alabama will have that opportunity. We know. Last question for you. I know you do a great job for Bama Insider covering recruiting as well. I would imagine that recruits were out in full force for this game on both sides. Bama not going to suffer in the world of recruiting here. I can't imagine there was any fallout from this, but you tell me.
No, there wasn't any fallout from what we were able to gather. Commitments came out onto the Twitter sphere, as we like to call it, and supported Alabama. A couple commits tweeting out "Roll Tide," and that's obviously the mentality there too. You can kind of look at it two ways as a recruiting perspective too. Look, Alabama's defense didn't look that great, but especially the secondary. But if you're a defensive back committed to Alabama, you have to kind of be licking your chops a little bit in terms of potentially projecting your chances of earning a starting role next year or earning some significant playing time. So in that respect, it could be looked at as a positive for them, even though they want to see Alabama win. We also heard from 2024 elite quarterback Julian Sayin out of California. He thought Bryce Young played phenomenal, and honestly, Bryce Young played as close to a perfect game as you could. He liked what he saw from the running game too. Jahmyr Gibbs having 3 touchdowns. So commits and targets were. Obviously you want to see Alabama come out on top, especially if you're favoring that program over Tennessee. But, they overall thought it was a good game and one that could have gone either ways. I don't expect a huge recruiting fallout from this. Now, if Alabama loses another game or two and, doesn't make it to the college football playoff, then we may have a little bit of a different discussion. But this one game won't change anything, in my opinion.
Thank you for jumping on, Joseph. Really appreciate your insight. Be well, good sir. Continue to do the good work you do for Bama Insider, and we'll talk again down the line.
Really appreciate it. Thank you all for having me on.
Absolutely. Take care. That is Joseph Hastings, Bama Insider, obviously not accustomed to covering losses. This is an interesting development, though, for those of us that have covered college football for a long time, and I have for over 20 years. You want to see Alabama-Tennessee return into a rivalry like it used to be many moons ago and hasn't been in a long time. You'd like to see the Volunteers sustain success, and you want to see that kind of balance in the SEC in which every year there's a bit of a mystery. I think it's big picture good for college football to have more teams, not less teams involved. If you're a Bama fan, you'll vehemently disagree with that. Obviously, you want to continue to monopolize the sport, or at least be one of the 2 or 3 teams that does. But just as a college football fan yesterday, and then we do the wraparound every Sunday, like I said, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's an opportunity to kind of have more guesswork involved as the season moves on. Several of the last 4 or 5 years, I guess you could say several instances over the last 4 or 5 years, you've kind of had a pretty good idea. There were 2 teams, maybe 3 teams that could win a national championship and nobody else. The part about college football this season that we've so thoroughly enjoyed, I do believe, and I think we've talked about it here on the College Football Wrap every Sunday morning, there are a lot of question marks that still remain. even for your top teams. Now, you might think that Ohio State is, or Georgia or Alabama, we now know Alabama is susceptible, that those are teams that you can just, with Penn, mark in the college football playoff. But I think we've seen enough in the way of doubt or inconsistency from a Georgia and now an Alabama. Even with Ohio State, you go back, you think about that first game. We now know Notre Dame is not a very good football team. Losing at home yesterday to Stanford is an ugly loss for that program. And there they were with an opportunity to beat Ohio State early in the season. So I think what you're witnessing is a little bit more competitive balance in college football. That's good for fan bases across the country. That excites everybody. It is shocking. Alabama came into this game on the wrong side of the turnover ledger. They were 117th in the country coming into this game in turnover margin, -5. They commit a ton of penalties, and yesterday they broke a record for penalties with 17, meaning an Alabama record and a Nick Saban record, for 130 yards. You group into that, and it's one game, but you group into that all of the yardage that they gave up on defense, and it's hard to fathom. Hendon Hooker was absolutely fantastic, and so was Bryce Young. The two quarterbacks living up to the billing. But you allow an opposing quarterback to complete 70% of his passes, 385 yards, 5 scores. Jalen Hyatt was that man, as the kids say, and many of you guys have referenced that throughout in the chat. Unstoppable. It's 6 catches, 207 yards, all 5 receiving touchdowns for him. So have yourself a day. Kentucky got back in the win column. That game should be fun as it's on to Tennessee. We are going to have Adam Luckett on here in just a minute as we'll reach out to him from KSR. Does a great job of covering Kentucky football. That's a big win to get them back where they needed to go. We also had an opportunity earlier in the show, I will tell you that, to talk with Nate Bauer from Penn State. You talk about disappointing, right? Penn State, a top 10 matchup against Michigan. The two teams kind of looked at each other. It was supposed to be sort of a mirror. They want to beat you up. They want to play physical football, put themselves in a position to get this game into a fourth quarter. It doesn't happen. And instead, it is a dominant performance from Michigan. In fact, those numbers were hideous for Penn State as Michigan lined up and did whatever they wanted. Opportunity to talk to Nate Bauer from Blue White Illustrated. In fact, Trey, if we would, he's back in the studio producing. If we are ready to go with Adam Luckett, we'll go with him. If not, let's go ahead and talk to Nate Bauer from Blue White Illustrated and recap the Penn State-Michigan game. And joining me to talk about it right now, Nate Bauer, Blue White Illustrated. Always appreciate his time as well as, hey, look, that's a tough game, Nate. I'm going to blame Penn State for starting my day off a little shaky on a park your ass Saturday where we all wanted to sit around and watch college football all day because it's Separation Saturday. And I said, man, I can't wait to watch Penn State and Michigan. Yeah. And even though I knew what the score was at halftime, we all knew this game was over. That was a physical butt whooping, Nate. Talk to me. Did anybody at Penn State see this coming?
I don't know about to that extent. Certainly, I don't think that the final score was something that anybody at Penn State expected. But the notion that Penn State's linebackers would have trouble defending the run, or that Penn State's front seven defensively in general would struggle, that Michigan might be able to dictate the terms of the game, that Penn State offensive line would have trouble, right, creating time, and that the receivers would create separation for themselves. Yeah, I think that those are things that Penn State is aware of its flaws to a certain extent. Many of the opponents that Penn State has faced so far this season were not equipped to expose them. Michigan is. Michigan, right? Like, so Purdue can throw the ball. They can't run. Auburn can run the ball. They can't throw. Everybody else that Penn State has played, Northwestern is a train wreck, Central Michigan and Ohio, they don't really count, right? And so you have this storyline of Penn State has been able to do, for the most part, what it has wanted to do through the first 5 games of the season because of the flaws of its opponents. Michigan doesn't have those flaws. And so straight up, Michigan was very, very much able to expose the weaknesses that Penn State has. And more important, Penn State had no counter Penn State doesn't have another move to be able to take Michigan off of that trajectory.
You wrote it, Nate, Blue White Illustrated. I told everybody at the outset where it was they can find your work, but I'm going to read a paragraph from your piece after this game because I think it's fitting.
Uh-oh.
Quote, in a game pitting contrasting styles against one another, Michigan was Michigan and Penn State, unbeaten and eager for an opportunity to prove itself on a national stage, was nowhere to be found. This is a criticism of James Franklin. It's a criticism. I point to people all the time and I say, listen, don't use records against ranked top 5 teams, top 10 teams as a way of illustrating that a guy is or is not something. Most people on the road against top 5 teams don't have a winning record.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, it's a dumb thing to do when you say, hey, they've lost 5 straight or 6 straight to a top 5 team on the road. Yeah, everybody does, man. But most people lose. Yeah. Yep. But that said, this was exceptionally poor. I saw James Franklin's post-game press conference. He looked a little ashen.
Yeah.
I think this was a stunning turn of events in the sense that, and you just described it aptly, they were physically dismantled. Where do you go from here after a game like that? Because, I mean, you tell me, my guess is that Penn State fans, Penn State players, and to some degree Penn State coaches certainly probably thought this could be the winner of the Big Ten, meaning Penn State could be that good. Now we know, resoundingly so, they're not.
Yeah, it's kind of tough because nobody thought that going into the season, right? Like, just to be fair, nobody had Penn State winning the Big Ten. Okay, bottom line. Competing in the Big Ten East was certainly, given the records and what they've done the last couple of years, was an aspiration. That was something, that was a place that the program wanted to get back to. They got to it. They got to that place where they could be in that game without having suffered a loss, right? They got past Purdue in a tough environment on the road. They got past Auburn, who has its own problems, admitted, but they were able to pass those tests. Now, the issue for Penn State is that they're not on the level of what Michigan represents, what Ohio State represents. This week becomes, I cannot stress, monumentally important for Penn State. Monumentally, because the question is Penn State in that, right, just off tier where it's right, you got that clear pecking order of Ohio State, Michigan, and then the next one is Penn State there, or is Penn State not? Is Penn State somewhere in the middle of the pack with the rest of the conference? And so, I mean, I think that Minnesota at Beaver Stadium, it is gut check time for Penn State. They need to figure out who they are, what they want to be. I think defensively that they know, right? I think, frankly, offensively, they know what they want to be. I don't know if they have the personnel to achieve what they'd like to be. And so it's a figure it out process, right? You either have to turn and say, hey, we don't have it, cannot compete with everyone that they're going to face. Or do you say, hey, Michigan is on another level. Michigan and Ohio State, they are what they are. We can be this against the overwhelming majority of the rest of the Big Ten. And I think, frankly, that that's the answer, is most of the teams that Penn State is going to face on the schedule from here on out, including Minnesota, and certainly all of the games after Ohio State, Indiana, Rutgers, Maryland, and Michigan State, they all have some fatal flaws themselves, right? Like these are winnable games for Penn State. And so, but you have to assert that. And so Penn State has had many, it's a long history, specifically under James Franklin, of struggling after the first loss of the season. When they hit this high, right, they come in unbeaten and they've had this success and then lose that first game. They have a terrible record in the game after that. This one's important. They got to get past Minnesota, because if they don't, you're looking at a 3-game slide going into November. Which totally upends any of the aspirations that they've had as a program this season.
Yeah, final thing here, I'm kind of curious, big picture stuff, Nate, for everybody watching around the country that tunes in to the recap and we go through the top 25. I always find it interesting and fun to cover, quite frankly. I've done it several times in my own career. I know you're doing it now. When a program is trying to get back to the elite status, when they're trying to become national championship contenders, college football playoff contenders these days, really the last thing to take hold most of the time is the line of scrimmage. And this was a game where the line of scrimmage was dominated by the other side. And that's what Ohio State and Michigan can do to people in the Big Ten. We see that a lot. You feel like, I mean, you got two dynamic running backs at Penn State. Everybody has watched those guys play. But if you can't block, you're not going to be able to make that next leap and go ahead and utilize that skill set against the better teams. How close is, I guess my question, how close is Penn State at the line of scrimmage? I'm talking about the recruiting and what they've done to this point. Clearly they weren't there yesterday. But how close are they to getting there? Okay, so that's the part.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the defensive line has had more success than the offensive line. They have put out pretty, especially edge rushers. They've had a string of them. They have another one in with denied Dennis Sutton. Like that, Adisa Isaac has been pretty good this year. Chop Robinson, it might be one of the best transfer portal additions anybody's picked up over the offseason. So the defensive line has they got some stuff to figure out, specifically at defensive tackle. It is kind of what it is in PJ Mustafa. He's coming off of an ACL. You got to squeeze as much juice out of him as you possibly can. Yeah. They have some horses in the stable on the defensive line. The offensive line is a conundrum for James Franklin for 9 years. That is the truth. It has not really been. The question to me is less, is it something that they can turn into a dominant presence? It's less that than it is, can you make it serviceable? Can it be good enough? Or can you figure out the other pieces that you need, right? Can you figure out a quarterback who is able to keep defenses honest, either by stretching the field, which means they need a receiver that they don't presently have on the roster. Okay. That doesn't exist. In Sean Clifford, they haven't had that for the most part for the last 3 years. They haven't had a guy who can escape pressure, who can make an accurate throw while under duress. It hasn't existed in him. Is Drew Allar that guy? I don't know. Right. And so it's not just the offensive line. The offensive line is not there and does not appear to me to be close to getting there in terms of dominance. But can it get to a place where it's serviceable? Yeah, I think so. Yesterday made it very clear that, and James Franklin said this going into the game, Michigan was going to, and this is what Michigan does. Michigan was going to dictate the terms of the game. Okay. Yeah. If Michigan is picking up 5 yards every first down and finds itself in second and short, third and short consistently, it's going to have success moving the ball. They did that, right? Penn State buckled down in the red zone and forced 4 field goals. That wasn't an anomaly. That's what Penn State's defense does. But eventually the dam breaks, right? Yeah. Michigan's offensive line opens up enough holes and their running backs go nuts. They have 67-yard runs. That's what Penn State wants to do. Penn State wants to be able to hit home runs like Michigan did and like Michigan ultimately won the game with yesterday. They're just not there. They just don't have that ability, especially when a team like Michigan can stack the box and totally snuff out the run the way that they did.
Nate, next time I talk to you about Penn State in a big game, we won't have to describe Sean Clifford yet again. We'll be able to talk about somebody else in all likelihood, and we'll be moving forward with a different discussion. And maybe the line of scrimmage will be there, and it's not 418 yards rushing or whatever. You know, it's an interesting thing. A lot of schools. Listen, everybody wants to be in the top 4. It's hard to get there. It takes a long time, and usually it is, as you've described, an uphill battle to get the hosses needed at the line of scrimmage. I appreciate you getting up early with us today and coming back and doing this interview. As always, your insights appreciated. You can read Nate's stuff, Blue White Illustrated. Be well, good sir.
Hey, you got it. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care, Nate. Thanks, man.
Hey, you got it. Thanks a lot, man.
Brother. Be good. Talk to you soon.
Take care. All right, bye.
You too. Bye. We could have edited that. That was for this morning really early. But I do see Adam Luckett's ready to go. We told you it was going to be choppy today, guys. We got guys all over the map. But KSR's Adam Luckett joins us right now. And for that, I'm appreciative. Adam, thank you. Welcome to the program. Good to talk to you.
Jeff, man, hey, happy Sunday.
Yeah, happy Sunday indeed. It's a good day in Kentucky. What a defensive performance. I want to start there. I'm going to say something you may not be accustomed to hearing outside of Lexington. I like watching Kentucky football. I do. I like watching them because they're physical. They play defense. They want to run the ball. They've got a good quarterback. I like Mark Stoops. I love their defensive coordinator. This is a fun team to watch. And when they're healthy, they're a pretty damn good football team. This really sets up now for something very interesting. You forced Mississippi State yesterday. Let's start there with the fact that Mississippi State wanted to run the ball, and they got dominated. I think it was less than 40 yards rushing when you remove all the other scramble stuff. That was a dominant defensive performance.
Yeah, they played the Mississippi schools here so far, and both those teams are borderline top 10 offenses. And Kentucky lost the Ole Miss game, but they held that Ole Miss offense to 22 points. And you saw what that Ole Miss offense ran for like 600 yards yesterday against Auburn.
Yeah.
They held them to 3 points in the second half. Mississippi State held them to 10 offensive points on Saturday. I mean, this is a team that just rolled over Texas A&M and Arkansas at home. Brad White just not getting enough credit. I think not enough. Maybe locally, I've been trying to pump like this guy is a real deal, and I think nationally he doesn't get enough credit. I mean, he's been awesome ever since he's been here. They've got a legit top 10 defense, and that they were really the story last night, and the offense finally caught some rhythm and got to play downhill there in the second half and take over. But just an excellent team defensive effort. I thought the scheme was great. Their third down pressure calls got home at Mississippi State. They didn't sit and drop 8 and let Will Rogers pick them apart, and they made tackles in space. And it was just a great, great defensive performance, and another one that Brad White and his defense has delivered this season.
Yeah, and Adam, I think you nail it there because it was a little slow going early in the game for Kentucky's offense, but that defense dominated in a way that allowed Kentucky to kind of catch up. And Chris Rodriguez Jr., 30 carries, 196 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's fun to watch play football, really good player. Right. And, and I thought Will made some big throws when he had to. We know the third down numbers are phenomenal. Really, this is complimentary football.
Yeah, that's how Mark Stoops wants to win, right? Like, I joked last night, like, this game is going to go in his, like, Hall of Fame Rolodex. When he pulls out game tapes to watch when he retires, it's one of the games is going to be this. Physical downhill running attack where they just wore Mississippi State down, ran for nearly 250 yards. Defense smothered the Bulldogs. It was a complimentary football win, and Will Levis was really kind of the key, making the third down throws, because those third down throws allowed them to go score points in the second half. You look at all their drives where they scored in that second half, there was a key third down throw from Levis in each of them. So he was kind of the straw that stirred the drink there, but overall it was running game defense, and that's what Mark Stoops has built this on in Lexington, and that showed out in a back in the corner spot. They had to win this game. There was no getting around it. The season kind of could have tailspun, and the season would have been a disappointment. Like, fans and people were their expectation or their season review was gonna hinder on this game, what Kentucky did against Mississippi State. And a win there, an impressive win, would allow them kind of to get this back on the tracks. And now they got a chance. They've got opportunities to do some stuff here in the back half of the schedule.
Yeah, they get a chance to heal up. They get a bye, right? Then it's the nationally prominent game against Tennessee now. I mean, that's going to be a lot of fun. I covered Mark Stoops when he was at Florida State. I always loved picking his brain and interviewing him and getting to know the way he thought. You're right. This is going to go in his Hall of Fame of games because they were able to play with leverage. They dominated up front, time of possession. They were efficient. They were able to run the ball downhill. How is Mark? I did an interview with KSR years and years ago, right when Mark got the job at Kentucky. How is he perceived? Is he a hero at Kentucky at this point? I would think he would have to be, but I'm not there in Lexington. He's done a remarkable job. Kentucky matters year in and year out now as a football program.
I mean, there was statue talk headed into this year. I mean, that tells you people were really giddy about this program, about this team going into the year, and everybody knows the beef between him and Calipari that broke out over the summer. I mean, he able to do that just says a lot. I mean, he's the best to ever do it here in Lexington, and I think the fans recognize that and appreciate him for that. There were some upset people here these last 2 weeks because of those losses, but that's a credit to him that he's built up where the expectations are as high as they are. And
what is ultimately, I wonder, Adam, and again, we're talking big picture for people watching outside of that market. I've always wondered, you build it up to a place where you can expect to go to bowls every year and you can expect to maybe get to 10 wins and do something pretty special. And then from there, once those expectations happen repeatedly, then you begin to wonder really what is possible. And I know most would look at Kentucky and say, well, they're never going to get past Florida when Florida's operating at peak efficiency, or Georgia when Georgia's operating at peak efficiency. But who knows? You can't say never, especially if you sustain excellence for as long as he's seemingly doing so now. In your mind, what is the next big step for Kentucky, and how close are they to achieving that?
Yeah, I think the next goal is 10-win regular season, a 10-2 regular season, and then finding a way to win the East. Like, that's, if you ask them, that's their next goal. They've accomplished everything else. They've beaten just about everybody. They've ended every bad streak Kentucky has. Yeah, they have a legitimate. You can't even argue it. They're a legitimate top 25 college football program. There's no argument against that. That they've established that. The next goal is getting the 10-2 regular season and winning an SEC East title. Now, fun
times to be covering Kentucky, and you guys do it great at KSR. I want to thank you this morning for coming on. Appreciate it. I know it was a really late night. I saw you out there with the street cleaners and everything else. I know it was late. Appreciate your hard work and your insight. Be well, sir. I'll talk to you again down the line, possibly right after that Tennessee game.
Thanks, Jeff. Have a good one, man.
All right, you too. Take care. Good times in Lexington as Kentucky football matters, and week to week, their team now you see pinned in there in that top 25, and they do end a little mini losing streak, and it sets up a hell of a matchup against Tennessee. So we were choppy this morning as we looked around college football, but the season, we are knee-deep in it now, and I think there are still a lot of games that provide a lot of mystery and a lot of opportunity for us to get excited every Saturday as we all collectively enjoy the game of college football in a way that sees you here on Sundays. So don't forget to like and subscribe to College Football Recap. We do it every Sunday, normally around 11 a.m., at 11 a.m. We got to wrangle our guys from On3 all around the country, get them in here and do some of these interviews. But we do appreciate each and every one of them who are able to make the time and join us as we recap college football. I want to thank all of you guys for doing that. We'll be back with you again next Sunday at 11 a.m. College Football Recap. We'll be back with you at 11 a.m. Like and subscribe. Our thanks to Trey Annity, putting it all together. I'm Jeff Cameron. Until next time, be well, everybody. Enjoy the football.